What's up guys, JS2Cents here. We're gonna bring you kind of a fun little video. We like to do these videos every now and then where we give you some what seems like extremely basic, everyone knows this type of knowledge, but you guys don't get the emails and messages I get. Otherwise you'd know not everyone knows this. So today we're gonna talk about 5 things you should never, ever do with your computer. Lian Li's all-new O11 Dynamic Evo builds upon its legendary design by bringing even more modularity and customization to meet your build needs. The dual-chamber design offers extremely clean cable management, while support for up to 3 360mm radiators and 10 fans offers superior cooling for the latest power-hungry components. To see the full list of features and capabilities of the new Lian Li O11 Dynamic Evo, follow the link in the description below. All right, so this first one might really seem obvious, but no, we've ourselves dealt with this problem, mostly because of our misorganization, whatever the right word would be. Nothing's organized in this place. It's a complete disaster, but whatever, I digress. That is never interchange power supply modular cables between different power supplies, especially if we're talking about different brands. Here's the problem. There's only so many different keys that you can have to make plugs go in and out. And those keys are gonna be limited to the manufacturers, the aftermarket manufacturers are making the plugs that anyone that's doing cable sleeving and stuff can buy these, and the power supply companies do it too. And then they have specific pinouts for their particular power supplies, and then the cables are specific to their series of power supply. The problem is, there are more modular cables and more brands and tiers and SKUs of power supplies than there are cables. So they are not bespoke to the power supply model they came from. So what you might find is a MSI or a gigabyte power supply cable might fit in an EVGA or a PowerSonic? Sure, PowerSonic, Seasonic, whatever. And then what you'll find is every now and then, folks will just go looking for a cable, they'll grab one, it fits, they plug it in, they turn it on, and something goes boom. Nick happened to kill an SSD by having a SATA cable from a different manufacturer plugged into the power supply we were using, which completely popped that SATA cable, anything attached to that SATA cable. We're lucky it didn't backfeed through anything else in the power supply and potentially kill other components. So that's about the worst we've personally experienced with that, but I know other reviewers have even had issues in the past where they've damaged components by interchanging power supply cables. Look, power is something you don't mess with in your system. It is literally the lifeblood of your computer, and when the positives and the negatives and the voltages are not where they're supposed to be, bad things happen. And you might lose an SSD, but you could also lose a graphics card or a CPU or a motherboard or all of it. So don't screw around with power supply cables. To kind of piggyback off that though, not all brands within their own power or product stack share the same power supply cables either. For instance, let's use EVGA as an example. EVGA is a good one in the sense that pretty much all of their power supplies past a certain point use the exact same pinout. It's simpler for manufacturing. You can replace cables easily without having to have different SKUs and different product numbers for particular cables for different power supplies. So they're 600 watts and they're 1000 watts and they're 1600 watts all use the same cables. That wasn't always the case though, because for a while there, the OEM or the main manufacturer that's making the power supplies that EVGA and other brands are using and then changing to their specs were Seasonic and Superflower. So you have 2 different OEMs, might say EVGA on the side, but the cables are not interchangeable. The nice thing is EVGA at least will put markings on their cables to tell you which version it is. Corsair is another perfect example. You've got so many different product line of power supply from Corsair over the years that they are not directly interchangeable, but they will put a generation number like Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3, Gen 4 on their cables so you know which ones are interchangeable. So just because they're the same brand, don't assume it's gonna work unless you can afford to potentially replace everything in your system. So talking about power, one thing you never wanna do, which I'm pretty bad about this, especially on our test bench, and that is never unplug or plug in a component with the power supply powered up. And what I mean by powered up is if it's plugged into the wall and the little toggle switch on the back is set to 1, there's 1 and 0 for on and off. If it's powered on, that little switch is on, juice is being sent to the 24 pin. More often than not, juice is still being, at least some form of it, is still being sent down the PCI Express cables. And the reason why you'll know that is if you have a graphics card that has any sort of LED indicator about whether the PCI Express cables are good. For instance, you'll have some power supplies, you plug them in, or graphics cards, you plug them in with the PCI Express and they'll turn white even though they're not on. That shows you right there that there is a circuit being completed by just plugging those in. Now, the PCI Express slot itself also has a ton of pins in there. Some are voltage, some are data, some are ground, that are also gonna be getting power through the 24 pin that's plugged in from your power supply. Now, the reason why I'm saying all this is because you should not go unplugging RAM and plugging RAM back in, or unplugging your graphics card, or unplugging a graphics card back in, or working on your system with that button on, because those voltages are live. Remember, when your system's sitting there off, all it's waiting for is the 24 pins, I can't remember, it's like 13 and 11 or something like that, those two pins to be bridged to trigger the relays to turn on the entire system. But power is still flowing through that motherboard and such. And the reason why I'm saying this is the first time I experienced this, I didn't realize the power supply was on my test bench, and this was a few years back. I slotted in the graphics card and the system turned on. Like, I just slotted it in and turned on. And I went, that was odd. So I turned off the power switch, unplugged the graphics card, turned the power switch back on to the power supply, slotted the graphics card back in, and it turned on. And it was something about completing that circuit and having the voltage suddenly jump through the PCI Express, complete through the GPU and back through the motherboard, triggered the relay to turn on the motherboard. The other thing is, because those pins are all active with voltages, if the power supply is on and you were somehow misaligned and you go shoving it down in there, you could actually be moving pins over on the graphics card slot or the RAM slot, potentially. Even though there's a slot in the middle, you could still go in diagonal offset and make some pins cross diagonally and bridge some things out. It's something you never, ever, ever want to do. That's probably one of the worst things that you could do in this entire list, is start unplugging and plugging things back in when the power supply is on. Same thing goes for the SATA cable. I've actually burned a cable once with a SATA drive. I'm like, oh, they're hot swappable. You can just plug them in and unplug them. But when you're not paying attention and you like shove it in there and you kind of go diagonal, like I said, even though it's keyed, and you cross those pins and bridge them. Yeah, I actually had one literally I heard a little pop and a sizzle and it was done. There was even a little charge mark on there. Fortunately, all it killed was the drive. Didn't hurt anything with the power supply or backfeed anything else in the system. So if you're new to building computers and you're working on your own and you start doing some troubleshooting or changing out RAM or a graphics card or cleaning or whatever, best practice is unplug the power supply from the wall. Because if the switch is on or off, it doesn't matter. That's a big one that could be potentially very costly if you don't simply flip a switch. Nothing's more painful than forgetting to flip a switch, which is free and literally takes 1 second when you're replacing hundreds of dollars worth of hardware, or thousands. This one's probably gonna immediately get some people that are gonna groan and say, oh, Jay, whatever. This is don't vape or smoke near your computer. Look, I'm very well aware that in this particular genre, especially if you're into like coding or programming or I don't know, it's just, for some reason, it seems like vaping, smoking, and gaming go hand in hand with lots and lots of people.
Stress relief.
Probably, because we all suck at games or whatever. I digress, that's a tangent. Vape, smoke, if you will, or vapor, will completely clog up your system if you're doing it all the time. Look, if you've got positive pressure going into your system, you got good fans, you got your tower right there, right in front of you, and you're sucking on your Subi stick, and you blow out all the vapor, your computer's gonna suck it in. And it might not hurt anything initially, but there's a lot of that juice becomes very tacky and very sticky over time. It's gonna start clogging up your filters, clogging up your fans, getting in your graphics card, getting in your heat sink, coating everything in your system, and it will become nearly impossible to clean without giving everything an alcohol bath in something short of like an ultrasonic cleaner. Remember Nick's computer we looked at last year where his friend borrowed it and unfortunately was vaping near it all the time, and how sticky and just the outside of the case itself was tacky and everything inside was completely gunked up with I say vape juice, but vapor. Cigarette smoke can do the same thing, although it's not as bad as because it's not as thick as vape. Cigarette smoke just makes your computer smell nasty and also get all ashy and gross inside there. So I'm well aware that vaping and cigarettes and computers for some reason seem to go very hand in hand. Do yourself a favor. Do what Phil does. Keep an N95 or something near your desk, and if you have to vape, just exhale it into the mask. Let the mask collect all the crap. Don't let your computer collect it. So now you might be thinking, okay, fine, I still want to vape and smoke near my computer, so I'm just gonna stick my computer in a little cabinet or a cubby next to my desk. Well, if you don't want your computer to overheat, look, if you don't want it to literally be a sauna for your computer, and you don't want to thermal throttle and overheat your components and start losing performance that you paid for, don't put it in a non-airflow cubby. The problem is people will put, a lot of desks have, you can tell they're not built and designed by actual PC knowledgeable enthusiasts or just basic PC knowledge. Airflow is important. Fresh air in, hot air out. That exchange has to keep happening. And if it's in a cupboard, even if you open the door, the hot air has nowhere to go except back through the opening which it came in, which is the door. So you start getting this recycling of air, and every time a hot air passes through the computer, it's gonna get hotter and hotter and hotter. And then what's gonna happen is that heat's gonna actually build up a little bit of pressure inside of that cubby because of the fact that hot air is higher pressure than lower temperature air. Cold air is not gonna be able to be pulled in there. It's just gonna create this kind of a thermal bubble that cold air can't get in, and it's just gonna keep recycling. And you might even start getting blue screens and shutdowns because as the computer gets hotter, even though it may not be thermal throttling like very much, it can still create instability. So if you are going to be running your system in any sort of a cabinet, I highly, highly, highly recommend you modify that cabinet, pull it away from the wall a few inches, and mount some fans to the back of it. Really good cabinets like AV cabinets and stuff will have exhaust fans built into these cabinets. That way they can get the hot air out. Radio equipment, your tuners and your amplifiers and stuff also create a lot of heat. So AV cabinets are designed this way, but more often than not, the PC cabinets just are not. And the very same thing is gonna go for your PlayStations and your Xboxes and such, and your Xbox Series X's and all of the PlayStation 55s and whatever. Those are also based on modern CPU hardware, and they're a lot hotter than they used to be. That's why you're seeing more active cooling in those. So if you're putting those in cabinets and shutting the doors, then you're also gonna be causing problems and thermal issues for any electronic that's sitting in those cabinets. So that's not just best practice for your PCs, it's best practice for any sort of electronic that creates heat. So this last one here is a question I get asked often, really often, and it's specifically regarding water-cooled PCs, and this is gonna apply to both custom water-cooled PCs, whether it be a custom loop that you build yourself or a kit that you assemble, and all-in-one water cooling units. And that is, do you leave your PC running overnight or when you're not around? And for me, the answer is no. Sometimes, and I get really upset when this happens, sometimes I'll shut down the system and I'll walk away, and I didn't catch that there's some program that was running blocking the shutdown, and then I'll not go back into my office at home or whatever for sometimes 2-3 days, and I walk back in and the room is really hot because the AC, I don't have the vents open in that room during the winter time because I don't want the heater going in there. I have a Intel, it's plenty hot. But I'll walk in that room and I'll just get hit with a burst of hot air, and the system has been running for 3 days unattended because it got stuck on that shutdown screen, and then when I didn't answer it, it just went back to the desktop. Even though I have only had in the last 20 years, 2 systems ever drip on me, I will absolutely never ever leave a water-cooled system running unattended. I personally feel that that is just bad practice. Anything can leak, doesn't matter. Even the best products have defects, and that can happen. I've seen so many times people telling me their AIO sprung a small leak and started dripping on their graphics card and burned a part of their graphics card and killed it. And that's one of the inherent risks you take when you start adding conductive fluid to anything electronic. Sure, you get cooling benefit out of it, but you also take an inherent risk and an increased risk factor of something going wrong. And if you're not there to catch it, then it can be costly into the thousands of dollars, because it could, if it drips down into your power supply, it could potentially damage the entire system. So whether you're running a custom loop or an AIO, do not leave your system running unattended. But Jay, sometimes updates and downloads and stuff take a long time, and I can't sit there the entire time. Those situations are going to arise, and you just have to keep your fingers crossed that nothing's going to decide to completely at the wrong time fail on you when it comes to seals and leaks in your system. The likelihood is that it's not going to happen. The problem is Murphy's Law says it's going to happen at the most inopportune time. And no one has ever experienced a convenient failure. So whether or not you're there or not, it's never going to be good that it fails. But if you're there to catch it early, then it could mean the difference between thousands of dollars. If you have to leave something running, maybe, I've never done this, but maybe open the side panel and put some paper towels or something on the back of your graphics card if you have an AIO, and then hope maybe that'll catch something if it starts to drip or whatever. But like I said, I've had a couple of, twice, and I even did some videos about it early on in this YouTube channel, where I talked about skunkworks had a drip. Fortunately, it developed down in the basement of my SMA8 case, where there was nothing there but metal underneath it, and it was yellow coolant on a gray case, which was really easy to spot. But because that was a solid panel on the bottom, it didn't drip down to the table. I only happened to notice it when I opened it up one day and was cleaning it. And I was like, where does all this drip everywhere? This big yellow puddle at the bottom. And it was just a real slow drip. It was a tiny little drip. And it happened because of one little slice that happened in the O-ring during assembly of that system that over time failed. And that's could have been a very costly mistake had that been up higher in the system and was dripping down onto components. And then I think maybe an honorable mention in all of this is, I don't know, maybe I'll have the guys help me out here. Never take your computer in the bathtub. That seems pretty smart, right? Phil, what's your never ever do with a computer?
Never tried to make a gaming laptop into a VR backpack because we found out how...
Laptops and a backpack do not make good mobile VR machines. Nick? I can't wait to hear this.
Don't leave it logged in around your friends.
Don't leave your computer logged in around your friends. Oh, and also don't have voice to text active in your car when you have Jay riding with you. Can't share that one with you guys.
We can't show that one.